ScotWeek is a non-profit 501c3 created in Los Angeles, the entertainment capital of the world. ScotWeek's mission is to celebrate and perpetuate the very special relationship between Scotland and the United States, as well as modern Scottish culture combined with traditional Scottish history. ScotWeek was created to shine a spotlight on Scottish contributions not only in the US, but throughout the globe, by highlighting Scotland's rich history of art, music, film and television, business and innovation, travel, food, and drink. As a charity, ScotWeek provides educational and internship opportunities through our partnerships with the Scottish Business Network, Entrepreneurial Scotland, and the Saltire Foundation, all with the support of the Scottish Government. In this series, we'll go behind the scenes of entertainment and industry as we interview our favorite members of the Scottish community. Get a first-hand look at the cultural contributions of the Scottish diaspora and travel with us around the world on an exciting journey to experience all things Scottish.
Hi, I'm Cindy McIntosh.
And I'm Kelsey Deanne.
And this is ScotWeek.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today for ScotWeek's interview with a very special guest today. We have A.L. Kennedy. Also, she likes to be called Allison. So hi, Allison, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. This is my time of night. I start to wake up about sort of 9 o'clock, so I'm getting quite sprightly.
Oh my goodness. And where are you in the UK?
I'm in the UK, I'm in England, I moved down to London and that was unbearable, so I moved just out of London, so I'm in kind of countryside, which is, it's quite like the countryside I grew up in on the northeast coast of Scotland. Salt marshes and mist and cold driving rain, drizzle, it's good.
Wow, yes, that sounds like you have some steely reserve in you.
Oh yes. It's the love of suffering. You must know about that if you're involved with the Scottish Week.
Absolutely, hence whiskey.
Yeah, we love the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of that, so I was doing some research on you, and you wrote this amazing article for The Guardian a couple years ago about Dundee, and you said it was ignored or laughed at in the rest of Scotland. So those of you listening today, I encourage you to go read the article because it's really well written and very fascinating. But we have a global audience today. So tell us now, what was it like growing up in Dundee?
It's kind of tough. It's an industrial kind of town. It used to make jam, but on a massive scale. It was like Britain's jam, marmalade. And it made cotton and jute, but all of these big industries, just the big industry would rise, do well, fail, rise, do well, fail. So loads of unemployment, and the women mainly worked. It was a lot of mill work, and so the guys stayed at home. If you look at like Victorian photograph books or 1920s photograph books, the women are big and muscular and stern, and they look like John Wayne, and all of the guys look like John Waters. And they're very sort of interesting and artistic and sensitive. So it's really interesting actually, because it's a totally reversed town. But lots of poverty, lots of hardship, and an odd accent that you won't hear really outside of Dundee. It's not on TV. It's not in any of the sort of made-up groundskeeper woolly kind of accents that you have. So it's been neglected. But lots of very fine Scottish folk songs come from around Dundee, which I promise I will not sing for you.
Oh, I was going to ask you, are you able to do a Dundee accent for us on the fly?
Kind of. You know a pie? I mean, a pie for you is like an Australian thing, like a pie, like pastry with a filling.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not a big American thing, because it's like everything in it kills you, and the wrapping also kills you. But in Dundee, a pie is a pear. You go, so there's a lot of A's. Or if you say, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. It's all in the nose and a lot of noises. There's very few vowels.
Oh, interesting. It almost sounds Canadian when they say, "Oh, how you doing, eh?"
A little bit. I mean, there's lots of little bits of Irish Scottish things in Canadian accents. But I stayed in Glasgow for like 25 years, which to me makes a lot more sense as an accent.
Absolutely. And that was my next question is, I went to Glasgow for my first time last year. And just from hearing from a lot of Scots, Glasgow has gone through this huge transformation from being industrial to, you have the train spotting era. And now it's kind of blossoming into this like foodie, hipster kind of vibe to it in certain areas. But what was it like for you for 25 years?
I loved it. I always wanted to be in Glasgow. And I finally made it. And I was in a terrible little tiny apartment that I couldn't afford that had water coming out of the walls and out of the floor and a crazy drunk woman next door. Yeah, it was still wonderful because it's just funny. Just people come up to you that you don't know. It could come off as aggressive if you're not used to it, but people come, and we have no guns, so you can have more relaxed social interactions very close to you with people who are complete strangers coming up and saying, "How you doing? This is me since Tuesday. Have you seen my feet? Got a state? Have you seen the state of my feet?" I was saying it to my man who's got a face like a Halloween cake. Have you seen it? It's just, what? Who? Excuse me, who are you? So it's, but people, very funny people. So even if when I was there and I was broke and I was cold all the time, but even just wandering around, the amount of funny, nice interactions you have with people are terrific. And when you get to know people, just lovely people, really generous, nice, imaginative, ingenious people.
Wow, amazing. And were you able to pull any of that amazing character and the landscape and the architecture and the people into any of the characters that you wrote for your books or for your scripts, or oh my gosh, you had a play as well?
Yeah, there's actually there's a short film. If you put into Google "Permanent Sunshine," there's a little short movie which is sort of written in that kind of speech. But yeah, I mean, the sense of humor and the mindset is probably in everything. Accent is not always in everything. The city is quite often places. I finally wrote a book set in London, and there was a review, I think, from The Guardian that says, "Finally, L. Kennedy is able to describe a place we can all recognize." It's like, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. And have you been back recently?
Well, no, I haven't been anywhere recently. I can go back to Glasgow, but I have to not go anywhere near where I live because it just makes me cry. I miss it so much. And I lived just around the corner from Alistair Gray, recently deceased, just genius magic realist Scottish author, and the nicest man, the most genuinely eccentric, hugely generous, delightful man. And I would just run into him and it made my heart glad. And I lived round another corner from James McIlvanney, and Bernard McClaverty. There were lots of people who you just kind of sit, and you wouldn't talk about writing and you wouldn't sit and have a list, they'd just be there, and that they were people that helped me think that I could write because they were doing amazing things and they were from where I was from. And Alistair's work was the first book I read that was set in a place that I knew, which is such a strong thing, because it's like, oh, you're from there and I'm from kind of next door to there, and you can write novels. Maybe I can write novels. Because like you guys, it's like, you're in LA, you have all the movies, you have all the cool novels. It's like everybody knows you, and we feel sort of very small. And not so much now, but when I was growing up, Scotland was very small and apologetic and sorry about everything. We had Robert Burns, and then that was it. So yeah, I missed that. I remember I went round to a sort of copy shop, and Alistair was there copying some of his artwork for something, and I knew I was going to move away in like a week, and I had to say I'm moving. And the thought of not seeing Alistair by accident a couple of times every month I just was weeping.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Oh my goodness. And has that changed now? Do you feel that Scotland is getting more of a spotlight with more Scottish novels coming out in your work, and for example, Outlander or Harry Potter, kind of based around there?
Yeah, I mean, Outlander's great. There's now an Outlander torrent. I mean, it's sort of what we recognize, and it's sort of you're making it up. But it's great. Yeah, I mean, since we got devolution, there was a slow roll of confidence, and I think the confidence to get devolution for the sort of semi-parliament that we have came from the first big roll of writers like myself. There's a little sort of selection of Scottish writers who are being looked at nationally, and it's kind of played the one off the other. And now when I go back to Glasgow, it's so happy and smiley and outward facing and cheerful with the tourists, and the edginess and the kind of, what are you doing here? Where have you come? I'm a tourist from somewhere else. Really? What are you going to do? I mean, there's always interest in art. When Salvador Dali's Crucifixion was put into the Glasgow galleries, they were queuing round the building and down the street. There's big appetite for culture, but it was always a bit edgy. It still is a bit edgy, but and it was always the place you came, and if you were funny in Glasgow, you were funny everywhere. You'd come to the big music halls, sort of variety theatres, and people were terrified of like playing the Glasgow Empire. There's don't know if you know Morecambe and Wise.
Yes.
Like on PBS sometimes. Morecambe and Wise came to the Glasgow Empire, and if I remember, one of them just punched the other because they thought a Scottish audience would laugh at an Englishman punching another Englishman, because they just didn't know what to do.
Oh no, so the audience was completely crickets with them.
Yeah, it's kind of nice and kind of terrible. And there's this guy, you wouldn't, he's like a sort of mini Danny Kaye, this guy, Roy Castle. Could play the trumpet, could tap dance, could be funny, could sing, could play the drums, and he comes out to Glasgow Empire audience and he does all of this stuff. And this guy, the guy from the gallery just yelled, "Is there no beep bleep end to his beep beep versatility?" It's just kind of, I mean, if you lean into the fact that you cannot win, it's kind of glorious. But people would get a bit surprised.
That's a really good test, though, to really, be like, I made this Glaswegian audience roll over in stitches. I've made it. Yeah,
and I also do stand up, so I have indeed had that feeling.
Yeah, that was my question too. How did you get into that, and what was that experience like? Because I know you've done the Edinburgh Fringe Fest that I've been to, is amazing. But what was your journey like going into that?
I kind of you do a lot of readings. I mean, you on the whole literary scene. There's more of a kind of organized scene. It would seem to be in Canada, but you've got like the arts and lectures, arts and letters sort of circuits that you have, and you have the university circuits down with you. So there's this thing where you stand up on your hind legs and you read this thing. And as an author, you're probably reclusive and you don't have feelings. You go away and write something, and then you discover what you feel, and then you give it to somebody like 5 days later, instead of having a fight in the time. So we're a little bit fugitive and clenched. But reading is the opposite of that. And one way to make it succeed, you can be terribly serious, you can be very poetic. I always was tempted towards being funny, because then they're laughing with you. And then you can read your thing, and maybe they'll like you, and maybe they'll be patient and tolerant of your awfulness. So that seemed to, got closer and closer to, I'm sort of doing stand-up without doing stand-up. I kind of have to do stand-up, because then I'm not pretending and hiding. And it's really interesting, because you talk about finding your voice as a writer. You also do it as a stand-up. There's a point where you're doing a gig and you think, oh, this is what I sound like when I'm doing this.
Interesting. So is this something that you write out and then you just practice performing it, or how does that work?
you sort of make the, they call them bits. You have a little bit, and it's sort of, it's not necessarily written down, but you know what you want to say, because it is improvisational, and you do respond to the audience, and you can make a whole, feel like 20 minutes up because you're in the mood and it's a great crowd and there's a burning dog and you don't normally see one of them, so let's go with the burning dog. But for it to work, it's a melodic, poetic form. You can even do a description that's a melodic, poetic, escalating description. And a Saturday Night Glasgow audience, which is wrecked and stoned and taking substances that you've never heard of, they'll just respond because it works on your body. You suddenly realize that's why poetry has always been there, because even stoned, wrecked people who have a reading age of maybe technically like 8, poetry happens to them, rhythm happens to them, music happens to them. And if you don't get the dum-da-dum-da, it ain't funny. Even though it is funny, the rhythm's wrong. It's not funny. So it's interesting, you know, because it is very literary, but, you know, literature's just the kind of copy on the advertising for a thing that people just do.
That's so fascinating, because last year I was reading an article that the public schools in Oakland, they stopped teaching Shakespeare because they thought their students were having such a difficult time understanding it. And just what you're saying about even stoned out 8-year-old level reading level can understand and hear poetry. It reminds me, it's like, oh my gosh, we still need poetry. We still need these, you know, pentameter written beautiful works of literature to be spoken and to be performed, and
it's a very natural form that you know, it's your heartbeat. But you know, Shakespeare was being performed to people who mainly couldn't read. It's just unfamiliar language, and that it's like reading the sheet music to, you know, Bob Dylan. It's not as good as listening to Bob Dylan perform Bob Dylan. So if you're doing Shakespeare, drag him to a theatre and get somebody to say it. Because up to a point, you can say a line of Shakespeare and it will make you know what it means. I mean, you can't just, you know, wander around vaguely in the middle of a soliloquy and not understand any of the lines. But, you know, the twiddly little bits where you're going, don't really know, do you mean this? Do you mean that? If you say it, it'll tell you. It's a really resilient machine for making a human being experience certain emotions in a particular order in such a way that the people watching will experience that emotion too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be the same for Robbie Burns too, of, you know, reading the old Gaelic, not necessarily written in the old Scots language. You're like, what does this mean?
Yeah, you feel it. And if you go to a Burns supper, oddly, I never did when I was in Scotland, but as soon as I came to London, everybody said, come and do the reply to the toast to the lassies. And it's like, really? Are you not going to be a whole bunch of like 50-year-old guys who are getting really wrecked and making rude jokes? Not that I object to rude jokes, but it's kind of, is it going to be that sort of thing? And you turn up and it's all these guys who are middle-aged guys who are quite drunk, to be fair, and who are going to drunkenly dance until 3. But they are so passionate about that poetry and so passionate about what it means and so knowledgeable. Those guys are so respectful. And you sit there, you know, Number One Club is based in London, in the Caledonian Club, which was a kind of mutual society for Scots who were lost in London originally. Now they're in a big mansion. And you get all these telegrams as round the world it becomes Robert Burns' birthday. It's like this international celebration of Scottishness, which is based on a writer, which is based on a poet, who was kind of, I mean, he was a terrible philanderer, but I mean, he was kind of pro-women, anti-slavery, pro being nice to everybody, anti-hypocrisy, just a lovely kind of great role model to have as a sort of national poet.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. And going back to your stand-up, so what was it like? What was it like performing at Edinburgh Fringe, and in Glasgow? Did you do it at a big amphitheater, or was it more like local performing?
I just did. There's a club called The Stand. There's a club. I did my, you know, my open mic spot. And I did it as Alison Kennedy because I kind of thought if I do it as Ale Kennedy, that's going to be weird and I'm going to get a weird audience. But after about a year, people caught up with me, or people would come up and go, I know who you are. And it's like, yeah, but now that I'm here, could we do something else? And then I started doing shows that, were full shows that were suitable for the kind of venue that would be at the Edinburgh Festival or in an art centre. So more like a funny theatre-y thing, which was kind of great fun. And I've done that in Virginia, Toronto, Guelph, Berlin. It's kind of fun, that last show. I need to write another one. I haven't done another show because I haven't written another show because I haven't had the time. And I got ashamed of doing the same show for too long. In fact, if you asked me to do it now, I could do it now because I've done it so often. It's just I will be in the old folks' home, if they still have old folk home, doing that show.
That's brilliant. Oh my goodness. And so how has quarantine been for you? Because they've been super busy. So what have you been up to?
Terrifying, obviously, because I don't want to die, and I don't want the people I love to die. My beloved is an older man, so he's not going outside. He's somewhere else, kind of safe. My mother obviously is older. So that's, it's sad, and I'm aware that lots of people are having a horrible time. On the other side, 50% of my time, I sit at home and I type. So it's no different. And I did have, as lots of people did, I had a sort of time when I was thinking, I've been rushing around, endlessly touring, coming home, taking the clothes out of the bag, washing them, ironing them, putting them back in the bag, leaving again. This is crazy. Like I don't actually have to go to LA. Be lovely. I go to the Chateau Marmont and see all the interesting people. Such a weird place. I can talk to people without running around a lot. So I made a decision. I'd like to only travel if I need to travel, and I'd like to be very involved with the world, but maybe electronically. But I've been kayaking. I've been really getting into nature a lot, which has been great. But it's been, I miss all the places I love going. I love Berlin. I love Cologne. I love Paris. I love Glasgow. I love Edinburgh. I love Inverness. But it's been weird. But it's okay. I'm an only child, and I don't mind my own company. So that part of it has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite books is A Room of One's Own, Virginia Woolf. I read that so many times, and I'm an actor and artist, so I feel like you and I are kind of someone that regards we are thrive when we have our own space and our own time to just really think and do our thing. But with all these distractions going on too, pre-COVID and now currently with online stuff, what are some ways that you really practice self-care and set boundaries for yourself of saying, nope, this is my time, everybody else can bugger off?
I wish I was good at that. I have never been good at that. My entire professional career has been punctuated with episodes of exhaustion and exhaustion-related illness because I never stop. But no, I've really tried to be with nature and to be nourished and inspired by it. I moved out of London specifically to be somewhere. There are woods here, the Bluebell Woods in the spring. I have never seen anything like it. If I kayak, there are a couple of harbor seals. When I paddle out in the kayak, if there's nobody else around, they'll just kind of come up. And one of them is very nervous because it's kind of young, but there's one that might be a parent, and it's just like, a water dog. And it just kind of, frequently it's looking the wrong way, and you kind of have to go, hey, and it goes. And then you just look at each other because they're, you have very similar faces and you just stare. And those kind of moments are really extraordinary. And it's been a time full of those, and just trying to remember I have to feed myself. I'm trying to make beautiful things for other people. I have to have incoming beauty, trying to keep fit. You know, all of the things I'm supposed to do. I ran a whole voice workshop. I normally do voice practice with a voice coach because, you know, I write words. It's my voice. So presumably I have to maintain this thing. Partly because you're doing readings and you're doing radio stuff and you're doing stuff online and you need a breath. But it, you know, it always feeds the words on the page. And I was going to do that physically in a group with a woman I've been working with for 10 years, but you know, we just did it on Skype, which was kind of different but the same.
Wow, that's fascinating. I've never thought about that as writers really doing voice exercising and breath work and that thing. Is that something you do before you start writing, or how does that work? When do you incorporate it into your life?
I sometimes do it when I start writing. I particularly try and think of it if I'm writing for some poor actor that I'm going to force to. I've got loads of friends who are actors and they sort of talk about, you know, trying to get these terrible words out of their mouth. So I'm trying to not make them suffer. And certainly you're thinking of musicality when you're writing. But I think doing like an intense week of just super breathing, just you get oxygenated to the point where you slightly hallucinate. You just come out of it different, and you find different things, and it's really educational to work with other people's words. And then, like towards the end of the week, this time actually because I'm writing an opera for the Biennale in Munich, I specifically said I'd like to try and produce at least one or two little arias for characters. And really the whole idea for the setting and the sort of setup and the main thread of what happens in the opera kind of came up because I had an open mind for a week while singing.
Oh, wow. And what do you like to sing? Do you like to sing operatic things?
It's it's a kind of interesting method. There's this guy called Alfred Wolfson. Wolfson with an S-O-H-N. He was a soldier in World War I when he was a young man, German guy, and he was injured, and he was a stretcher bearer anyway. So he was hearing people screaming and already interested in voice, but he made this amazing discovery, which was people, when they're screaming for their life, they have this irresistible, complete sound, which is them. Why don't people sound like that before they're dying? So he kind of devoted his life to allowing people to be completely there and worked with a lot of opera singers and gave them like crazy 4-octave range, ridiculous voices. Fled the Nazis, obviously didn't like the Nazis for all of the reasons, and he's Jewish for all of those reasons, doesn't like them either, but he hated the sound because the sound of the voices was so crushed and small and aggressive and away from being human that it was telling him a lot of information about the people. And, you know, you could guess anyway, but it's like, nope, somebody who's decided to sound like that has decided to not be human. So they could do anything. So he came to London and he worked a bit with Olivier and some people. And then he worked with this guy called Roy Hart, who really took it up. So I get taught by somebody who was taught by somebody who was taught by Roy Hart, and somebody who was taught by Roy Hart. So there's this whole, but it's very, very open, and you just sing vowel sounds below your natural range and above your natural range and through your natural range to the sort of fullest physical extent. And then you put that energy into words. And it makes you very, the first time I did it for a full week, I came back to writing. And I was sitting there thinking, I hate all this. This is just so much prettiness and padding and BS. I just have to cut. Because you can overload. I think it's not trusting the reader. I think if you can be simple, we're always aiming to be simple, but you suddenly thought, nah, I'm not managing to being simple. You know, because the reader will help and is there and has time. And it's the same thing with an actor. You know, you give a good actor a line, and you just hear them highlighting the bit that is totally unnecessary, and they already got there. And it's like, what the hell do I have to do with this then? Because I gave you it. That is so educational and shaming.
Oh.
So you're always trying to cut it and thinking, no, he'll get there, and she'll do that. No, I'll just give them that.
Oh, that's brilliant that you see that. Right, well, of course you do, because you're amazing. But yeah, you're totally right. You're working with a lot of new writers, you know, in their early 20s or whatever, and some of them are brilliant. But then, you know, it's constantly that stripping away. And the same thing with acting of like, don't push, just say it simply, trust the audience. Totally.
Yeah, just be, or even when I was younger, I used to go to see the Royal Shakespeare Company a lot. Shakespeare really lit me on fire at a time when the actors really nailed it, and they did loads of voice work, and they were embedded in that company. They were in for at least 2 years. They came out different. One of their leading men was Alan Howard, amazing guy, and I saw him in a few things. And then I met him as an older fella. You know, and I was able to say thank you for changing my life, because you were part of me being lit up by language. But he was talking about saying Shakespeare, and this young guy had come up playing a lead Shakespeare role, and he was saying, you know, I don't understand this. And it was interesting because, you know, Alan Howard, very intellectual, absolutely wants to know what's going on, but he said to the guy, it's not actually important that you understand it, it's important that they understand it. And that idea is very interesting too, because you get loads of, you know, young writers, and they want to be in it. They want to be in the prose, and they want the process to be in the prose, and they kind of, and it's like the reader doesn't want you there. The reader does not want to know that you're there. Even if you're being a personified character narrator, it's not you. They don't want you. You're in the way. You're a window. They want to look through you. Then they want to open the window and jump out into the, you know, the world that you built. They don't want you there.
That's amazing. That's such great advice. Wow, thank you for that.
Perfectly all right. You sort of learn by making mistakes.
Always. But going back to your opera, that you said that you wanted to write a couple arias, and when I was doing research, I found a couple articles that were in German, and I think one of your books was translated. Do you speak German?
A little bit. My German is very mangled. My German translator is Toya. Ingo Herzke is amazing. I get this woman, Katja Schmidt, wrote to me like really 28 years ago, something ridiculous like that. She was a student. She managed to get money out of the British Council to arrange a tour. So her and these other 2 or 3 students, they arranged this little A.L. Kennedy tour, because they were this little A.L. Kennedy fan club. God knows why, because I think I'd written 2 books, and they were, you know, I was getting there, but they were not there. But they were very enthusiastic, and Ingo had learned his German in Glasgow, so he understood that song. And we did this tour, and I talked a lot with Ingo, particularly about the music, that you have the meaning, but you have the music, and the music amplifies the meaning, and the meaning amplifies the music, even on the page. And he kind of got it, and he said, you know, I'd like to be your translator. And I never have any say in who translates me, but 4 or 5 years later, Ingo Herzke is my translator, and he's translated all but one of my books. And he translates the dramas, the radio dramas, the newspaper articles, the everything. And he really gets it. He almost never asks questions. He just gets it.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And I know you've written, you have your short film that I haven't seen yet that I will definitely go watch. But then you have 2 other scripts, Stella Does Tricks and Dice.
Oh, yeah. From your point of view, those would be the things. Yeah, Stella Does Tricks was my first movie that got made and distributed within 3 years. This never happens, and gave me a completely unrealistic idea of what working in film was going to be and what working in British film was going to be, it was insane. It was like being given 4 unicorns on a skateboard with a griffin on fire with a circus tent around it. I mean, just crazy. So yeah, I got a movie made with Kelly MacDonald in it, being amazing in it. Yeah, it was nice.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible. So did you come up with the original script and you were trying to pitch it around, or did somebody come with you for the idea?
No, somebody actually came to me, a director, and said, I've read a short story of yours about child prostitutes. Would you write a movie? I've been interviewing a lot of child prostitutes. Would you like to do the movie? And I didn't use any of the footage that she used of those women because they didn't have anything but their story. I just based it on my short story, which I based on the facts of that area, but I didn't want to steal anybody's life. And yeah, then I wrote it, and at that point the British Film Institute would give you money. You got £75,000. Nothing. We got given £75,000, and if we could make a film for that, we could make the movie. So a lot of it is like, we're doing this one take and that's it. Or we're going to have a potato on a stick and some kind of back projected, I don't know what. So like there's a car blows up and it's like, we have one car, we have one explosion, just don't fall over, and please let it not rain. But it's, it did quite well.
That's absolutely amazing. And what was kind of the reception that you got, especially, from, people in London versus Glaswegians?
We got a nice reception. We got a nice reception in Scotland and in London. The thing was, I did get a lot of people asking me to write other film scripts, but they were all about prostitutes, or broken women, or abused women, or criminal abused broken women, or amputee, criminal abused broken women. I think the last one was an amputee as well. It was just kind of, and yeah, amputee abused broken women should be in movies, but this was more like a nature documentary, and we just were going to stare at these people as if they weren't people, which I was not interested in at all.
Yeah. So, and how did you do your research for your short story to begin with? Did you see a lot of that around where you were?
Not really. I mean, you'd see the particular areas, and you'd see women, and I kind of knew people who'd done that work earlier. But I kind of knew the facts of what that life is, and once you know the facts, you just assume that person is human, and put them into those facts. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting conversation too, because people would say, how did you do the research? And it's like, well, I'm a person and I've met people. And then I thought, well, if a person was like 16 and all of this shit happened to them, how would they react? So yeah, they don't normally, if you're writing about a lovely white middle-class family in New Canaan, nobody says, how did you do the research? They assume that everybody knows those people because they're normal. Mm-hmm. But it was great. We had, it's interesting with the Netflix movie with all of these very young girls, which is quite strange, or not movie, series. Kelly MacDonald, who's the lead, still looks ridiculously younger than she is, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and she did then. So she was absolutely overage, but looked not overage. But we had to have a child playing her as a child. We made absolutely sure that she did not know what film she was in or what was happening. Completely, it was all written so that if there was a younger person, nothing bad would happen to them, or be near them, or be anything they could work out.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see Netflix go a different way.
Indeed, yeah.
It's not hard to avoid that stuff. It's not hard to avoid exposing children to terrible things.
Yeah, and then it happens. I've been on set where a director was screaming at a 10-year-old, trying to get her to cry for a scene. And it took everything in me to not go over there and steal that child away. Yeah, it was hard to watch. And I should have done it. But anyway.
Yeah. No, I just, as I say, I've got lots of friends who are actors, and I just sort of...
Yeah.
The shit you have to put up with.
Right.
And it's just such a lonely place. And even, my goddaughter was doing a movie, and it's very exposing. It's literally exposing. It's emotionally exposing, and you want somebody to be in charge who's not a sociopath enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, switching gears just a little bit, I was also reading on your website. Somebody was asking, why does fiction matter? And you gave a brilliant answer. And a little bit what we talked about earlier about reading fiction, you're able to really get into a character's world and a character's life, and hopefully be a little bit more empathetic to that person. And I didn't know this, but you said during World War II, people in the UK read more than they had ever read. But with that, the government kind of came in and censored and imprisoned writers about what they could write about and all that stuff. So I was wondering, and I don't know when you wrote that, but what are kind of the similarities you've seen during Brexit and quarantine?
Yeah. Where do I begin? Yeah, if I start screaming now, and you may be cut off on like next Wednesday, it's such bad lying. It's such bad fiction. It's storytelling which doesn't agree with itself in the course of one sentence. It's this extraordinarily bad lying, but it's lying amplified by online manipulation and media manipulation. So if you say the sky is red 1,500 times every day, and it's on the front pages of every newspaper, and even the newspapers that are horrified, or the people who are commentating are horrified, they keep saying the sky is red. Somebody says, it's like, well, don't even say it, don't even amplify it. Why are you amplifying it? Eventually it will become dangerous. And now you have people saying you die if you wear a mask. Why isn't Japan dead? Why isn't every nail technician dead? Why are not all of the surgeons dead? This doesn't make any sense. And then you have to cling to that so violently because so much of reality is contradicting it. All of these weird positions, and they've all been engineered now, online with Facebook, just to kind of, I think the UK is an experiment in how fast can you just unpick a democracy. And we were the test run, and then 2016, it's like, that went well. Where can we go next? How crazy can we make it before people notice? So yeah, it's been very tough. You're seeing very dangerous fictions. There was a demonstration in Trafalgar Square today, people standing very close together, not wearing masks, waving placards saying, "Where's the epidemic?" All over you. Are you going to die? Are you going to kill somebody else? Do you have any relatives that are unwell? Are you going to overwhelm your local hospitals and put a high viral load on a healthcare professional who's going to die because you wanted to shout in a square because you don't want to take the word of doctors who maybe know stuff? Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's like a smart person deciding to be stupid.
Yeah.
Just because a few things don't go your way. It's like somebody asks you to move a chair and you decide that there shouldn't be chairs. It's like it's a really disproportionate reaction. I'm a white Christian person. Nobody's trying to replace me. I'm here. I'm not being replaced. The fact that a Mexican exists does not stop me existing. It's a very odd kind of, it's like a kind of addict mindset. It's like quite a tweaky, speedy mindset.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of division in labels when you're saying white Christian versus whatever other ethnicity, gender, whatever it is. It's like, why can't you just be like, yep, that's what it is, and can't we just all
yeah,
that's what it is.
You have this brief moment when you're identifying people who aren't getting a fair shake, and then immediately there's this downward pressure to say, okay, then all of those people you just named who aren't getting a fair shake are our enemies and they should get even less. Really? How does that work?
Yeah, it's
Which is,
fascinating.
why I'm fascinated by World War II, because obviously then we weren't the Nazis, which is already interesting, given that now we are. But interesting that Britain was, very hierarchical, really rigid class system, like in 1939, systemically racist, anti-Semitic. The Germans were kind of surprised that we didn't kind of go with them. And the people in charge at the time, partly they were saying, well, we can't go with you. Well, yeah, we agree with you. You're very groovy, but you want some of our stuff and you can't have our stuff. So we're going to go to war. You can't have Africa. We have Africa. No thought to maybe Africa would like to have Africa. So in the course of terrible things happening, which is what you would kind of, if you have to have a pandemic, what you would hope would be, there's terrible things happening. People are in pain. People are in obvious need. People are literally dying. You would think everybody would put aside all of that stuff and say, no, we're going to come together. We're going to sort you out. And we're going to look at the real reasons why you're suffering far more than you're suffering. Why is that? Why is your healthcare really terrible? Why were you ill already? Why don't you have any food? Can you tell? Oh, you're on the street. You're homeless. Okay, how did that happen? How do you, a human being as human as me, end up on the street with no food, with a terrible disease that will kill you?
Mm-hmm.
How does that? Why do we waste you? Which is what you would have hoped, but it took a long time. It took 39 to 45, and just hammering and pounding and. No, these guys are crazy. You have to have the good guys in charge. No, that doesn't work. You have to make it work. This guy went to a good school, but he's a moron and he's got 15 of our units killed. He can't be in charge anymore. Oh, he got his head blown off. Well, that's great. Sergeant Smith can now be in charge because he's good. Really Darwinian. These guys always go on about Darwin and natural selection and eugenics and everything. They're the people who've been most protected from natural selection. I swear to God, Boris Johnson cannot dress himself. I swear to God, he gets help from whatever girlfriend. And she gives him his first half bottle of whiskey and he staggers off to whatever he's going to ruin next.
Oh dear. Oh my goodness. That's interesting. You said it again. Humanity and humans and see them as humans. And it's funny, in the States, we on the news every day we go, oh, there's 30,000 cases of COVID or whatever. And we turn humans just into numbers or objects of, oh, you got tested positive. Oh, now you are the disease. You're no longer human. You're in this category. And it's so fascinating to see, this global phenomenon of, different countries, different people categorizing people different ways.
Oh, sure. And I mean, it's terrible writing, but it's good writing because you don't say cases. You say cases. You don't say people. Yeah, it's terribly bad, evil, wrong writing in detail, repeated detail, and sitting there as a writer, it's like. It seems like you're not saying anything, but you're saying something. There's a constant subtext, which is quite scary. And which is why, people get locked up for being a poet. Poets are so uninfluential. Nobody likes them. None of the other writers like them. Poets don't like other poets. They're dreadful people, gravy stained in their black pullovers. They get locked up. They get locked up because they like people inside, because they delight the heart, because they give you a secret joy that the sense can't see, that the policeman can't see. They give you a reason to smile that nobody knows about. It's this secret fire that you carry within yourself. So yeah, but it's tough because you're kind of punching back against 24-hour insane news cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to be respectful of your time. I have one last question.
Sure.
So, we have a global audience again, but I have Scottish ancestry, a lot of Scottish family, and I adore Scotland. But I wanted to hear from you. What do you think sets the Scots apart? Whether it's just whiskey or a sense of humor or the weather or, something like psycho personality wise. And after that, like, How do you think people, the Scots around the world, can use that unique special ability to make the world a better place?
Oh, that's a huge question. I mean, Scots can be terrible. Around the world, Scots have been awful. They've arrived having been oppressed at home and obliterated indigenous populations. We can be appalling. Um, but, I'm a Celt genetically. That means I come from Mesopotamia. We're kind of a wandering people. We're a curious people. We're a wandering people. We're an artistic people. We have strange, sinuous art forms. We have a strange old language in Gaelic, which is beautiful and has bits of Latin in it and bits of ancient Greek in it. And it sort of shows that as we moved, you see red-headed Celts and Celtic sites going through Germany, and you see the names of the rivers, the Danube and the Dnieper. It all shows Celts. And then you see in North Africa Celts. We've moved around a lot, and there is a sort of history that's very sunshiny of people like Robert Louis Stevenson going way away from Scotland, and particularly Dundonians leaving Dundee. Dundonians always leave Dundee. I am bound to be talking to, hundreds of thousands of Dundonians who've left immediately, left at 8, and sort of integrated. Like Robert Louis Stevenson went to Samoa, learned to speak the language, became a much loved person who wasn't Samoan, but who was in favor of Samoans and who helped them build a road and who spoke for them and who wrote some of his beautiful late long short stories from the South Seas, really talking about what the British Empire really did and what the South Seas were like and natural beauty and morality. And there's kind of for good or bad, morality's been baked into us with centuries of theocracy, and that could be really oppressive, it could be really misogynistic and horrible and joy-hating, but also it means we can know right from wrong. And the duality of right and wrong, we have a lot of stories about, Jekyll and Hyde, and Deacon Brodie's respectable in the day and at night he's not, and the Confessions of a Justified Sinner about this guy who was a true Calvinist, so he believed he was justified and going to heaven and he could do anything. Calvinism is interesting, but he had this dark shadow. There's a lot of duality in Scottishness. So that's this awareness of darkness and joking about darkness and responding positively to darkness can be magnificent. We're not the nicest people ever. There is no nicest people. We can be extraordinary. The music is amazing. The comradeship is amazing. It's a very Middle Eastern, the Gaelic Highland tradition certainly is a really Middle Eastern tradition of welcoming the stranger and feeding the stranger. And the big cities like Glasgow, huge tradition of, if you don't have anything, we'll work it out. We'll sort you out. Refugees settled in Glasgow, if they were trying to deport them, quite often the neighbours would just say, no, you can't deport them because they're our neighbours now. They might be from Afghanistan, but no, they're not.
Wow, that's beautiful.
And there's a thing in Glasgow now called refugee. If you're a Glaswegian, you're a Glaswegian. If you're from Glasgow, which becomes shortened to Ouija, and if you're a refugee who lives in Glasgow, you're a refugee. And if you come to Glasgow as a refugee, you get the clothes, you get the toiletries, you get the toothbrush, but you get a bag that somebody like me has filled with stuff that's useful, and a card that says, hello, welcome to Glasgow, welcome to Scotland, thank you for coming. Here's a Scottish thing like a hat or a scarf or some shortbread. Just hello, thanks for coming. Thanks for being more wandering people. We've always been wandering people. We welcome them. Why would we not? The stranger is always an angel in disguise. So yeah, that's kind of great. And there's a restaurant in the village that I live in now in Essex, which is a Syrian restaurant. And the guy has lost an awful lot of his family, but he always says that he feels that Britain now is his family, but he came in through Glasgow. So his first arrival in Britain was, hello, here's some stuff, here's some Scottish stuff, how are you doing? Good to see you. What are you bringing? which is a human thing. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to love about Scotland, and people are very forgiving about being countries where Scotland has been there as an army, wearing a version of, you know, the Philomore, the Philibeg as a military kilt, playing the pipes. You know, India now, they have military Scottish pipes at Indian weddings. You can't have an Indian wedding without Scottish pipes. Which is so polite, given that we were invading them and stealing their stuff.
Yeah.
You get a great welcome. I remember being in New Zealand talking to this Maori lady, and she was so enthusiastic, and she was saying, you know, all of that Pacific coast, from the Pacific Northwest through the South Seas down to New Zealand, all of that strange, sinuous, interwoven carving that you get, it's kind of familiar to a Celt. And she's sort of saying, oh yeah, well, the Celtic art, it's so like our art, how are you doing? And the sort of tribal system, it's really Scottish. So nice to me as soon as she knew I was a Scot. And we were so horrible to New Zealanders. We invaded them and stole their stuff. It's like, hey, how great to see you. We kind of got away with being the strong arm of the British Empire. But it, you know, it had somebody else's name on it, and we can be nice. And I will say, you know, that nice blue and white Scottish flag has never flown over somebody else's land, making them sad, which you can't say of the, you know, the Union Jack is a very ambivalent kind of a thing. But equally, the flag of the South is a version of the Scottish flag. That's not a great flag. And the flag of Jamaica is a saltire because Scottish people owned lots of Jamaicans. This is not good. So nobody has a perfect history, but there's great stuff in Scotland, and I could not be prouder of what's happening there. There's just a buzz about the place, and a confidence and a happiness that's really interesting. And as a Scot living in England, I feel so sorry for the English. And I you know, I meet and talk to my neighbours and friends who are English. They're so sad. They feel that they've been robbed of their country and their identity, and that it's just been hijacked by thugs, and that they can't be English. My mother's English, and she, you know, 2 or 3 times a week she says, I don't want to be English, because she feels that Englishness can't be good anymore. That's how much it's been hijacked, which is tragic. But reversible, because I remember when I was growing up, Scottish was a bad thing to be. It was an imperfect form of Englishness. It was an embarrassment. It was something you didn't talk about. And that's changed, just in my lifetime.
Wow, that's incredible. And what are you, just to finish up,
Sure.
where do you see Scotland moving then? Like, what are your hopes in future with this new buzz and positivity going on?
Well, particularly with Boris Johnson being Boris Johnson, it's like a saddlebag full of awfulness. These tiny lies sewn into it. There could be a hideous civil war, which England uses as a distraction for the mass casualties because of the incompetence of the British government. It could be awful. You could get Scottish independence, Scottish nationalism, which in a way is already happening. Scottish nationalism is a kind of progressive, we like Scotland, but if you come here, you're Scottish. We don't really care if you've been somewhere else. You know, the more American idea of being Iranian American, African American, Swedish American, German American. That sort of idea is very unfamiliar in Europe, but it's the Scottish idea is very much that if you come to be part of the, you know, if you're born there or brought up there or identify as being of there, that's all great. And that sort of started with whether you called yourself a Scottish author. You could have any of those three and be a Scottish author. So it sort of comes from a cultural root a long time ago. So that, you know, it could be that an independent Scotland, as part of the EU, could say, look, you can be proud of where you come from. You can be proud of your country. You can celebrate it without stabbing people in the face or getting into this whole blood and soil Nazi bullshit, because why would you? And that's not how we won, you know, this obsession with losers. You know, there's the Confederate authorities lost. The Nazis lost. We beat the Nazis by being a bunch of people who were really kind of polite to each other and expressed appreciation for each other, and were very diverse and didn't go on about it, but just were very happy. The Free French and the Free Danes and the Free Poles and the Poles in the entire RAF squadron that flew for the RAF that was Polish, and the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians and the West Indians and the Indians and the New Zealanders. You know, everybody helped, and we were very happy about it for a bit. But now we did it all by ourselves and we hate everyone. It's like being a 3-year-old. It's like really presenting yourself to the world as a slightly drunk toddler that's been very badly brought up. This is not good. But there we go. As I call him in my German pieces, Popo in German is sort of tushy. Because when people liked Boris, I don't know why they ever did, he's never changed. He was Bojo. So for the German pieces, I called him Popo. He was Popo der Todesclown, which is Popo the Death Clown. And I kind of think that's stuck, because he hasn't got any better.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, I know in the US we have an election coming up, and you're kind of stuck with Bojo unless something happens. So we'll see.
If it unravels and you get Biden, Johnson is sunk, because the same staff behind the scenes organized. When I say the same stuff, I mean Mr. Putin. Democracy was so nice. It was fine. It wasn't wonderful, but it was okay. It was comfy. It's this obsession with excitement, the media obsession with excitement. It's like they don't just want politicians who are they want exciting politicians, which is always going to end up with politicians who say, hey, there might be a civil war. So okay, I'm excited. I've lost 15 pounds and I'm drinking heavily, but yeah, I'm excited.
Oh dear. Yeah, it's it'll be an interesting time ahead. Absolutely. Well, Alison, thank you so much. You are amazing. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you today. Thank you. And
top lip. Top lip of courage. Top lip.
Very good. And everybody watching, you have your website, and how can people find you if they want to follow you and learn about more about what you're doing?
If they want to follow me on Twitter, which is where I am the most, I am at Writerer, which is capital W, writer, and then an extra ER on the end. Don't know why I did that. It's very hard to explain. And if you Google me, you'll kind of get my website, and you'll get my YouTube feed, which has got some bits and pieces on it. There's a horrible amount of stuff out there, one way or another. Some of it described on my website.
Oh goodness!
But if you find the website, which is www.a-l-kennedy.co.uk, then you'll get a link to the Twitter and a link to the YouTube and links to radio plays and all of that stuff.
Awesome. Well, Alison, thank you so much. Keep yourself safe and sane, and enjoy your nature. I'm so excited for you.
Well, God bless America. It also was a good idea. It shows great promise, and there is nothing nicer than a nice American, and nothing more well-read than a well-read American.
It's always a process, isn't it?
Oh yeah. It's a learning experience. Oh my goodness. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah. Take care, and my love to LA. It's a great place.